Assalamualaikum everyone. I'm Usama Khilji back with another episode of the DigiPod on DawnNews English. In this show, we talk about digital rights and all issues related to tech. And today, we're going to be talking about user privacy, consent, and accountability. And the reason we've put these three issues together is that they're interlinked because as we know, with technology and with social media, but also the advent of the social media services and companies, tech platforms, the tech companies have become very, very powerful, where user data is increasingly not safe, not secure, and is being used for various purposes, a lot of which we don't even know about. So, for example, just recently, Google was fined something to the tune of $68 million to settle claims that it recorded private conversations. So to talk about this case, but about issues in tech in general, we're going to be talking about how the lawsuit took place, why Google settled it out and agreed to pay all this money, and what this case means for user privacy in a tech ecosystem where we seem to have little to no privacy and all our conversations are being recorded. So for this, we're joined by William Fitzgerald, who's joining us from San Francisco, California. He's the founder of the Workers Agency, and they're dedicated to holding the most powerful people in the tech industry accountable. So thank you very much for joining us, William, and for being part of this conversation on user privacy, consent, and accountability. So it'll be great to start off with a bit of context on what you do, what your work is, but also if you can run us through on what the issues with Google really have been, what triggered this lawsuit, what did the users allege, and how voice data collection works across smart devices and applications, because this is something I'm sure all our listeners and audience are curious about.
Of course, yeah, and thank you so much for having me here, Sama. I'm so excited about this show that you're hosting. So yeah, this case emerged recently. It just kind of broke the news last week. For the longest time, Google has been, collecting. I mean, actually, going back even to their mission statements, their mission has been to, collect all the world's information and to make it accessibly useful for everybody. And that's a really amazing mission statement, right? If you think of kind of libraries and research and R&D, like that really stands out. Unfortunately, because of the massive profit motives that the company is driving towards, it's kind of turned in an almost insidious direction in recent years. And this recent case is a good example of it. Sure, people have, I know this just from within my own family, we'll often be talking about something and we'll then, hours later see an ad for that product pop up on our phones and we're like, oh my God, are they listening? And nobody knew. And it's a conspiracy theory, but we never had proof. And this case, I think the first time, definitely on the Google side. So just for folks who don't know, Google basically settled and they didn't let it go to trial. And oftentimes, again, just to clarify, I'm not a lawyer. I haven't read the legal case in this particular instance. But they, they settled before it went to trial. And what that typically means is they don't want a massive discovery and they don't want this to be played out in the court of law, which is ultimately the court of public opinion. And the settlement was quite significant. I mean, for Google, it's peanuts, but for us normal people, 68 million is quite a lot. And it's just really interesting that they are kind of basically admitting guilt by settling out of court, that they were actually doing this. Their phones were actually listening. When they launched that product, they kind of told everybody that we'll only listen when people say, hey, Google, play that song. But in actual fact, the case was that they were actually listening all the time, per my understanding of the case.
And I think that's very, very significant because people have Siri on iPhones or Google on their Android phones, and it seems to be like, okay, we'll just say hey Siri and they'll listen then. But of course the phone is listening out to catch you saying hey Siri or hey Google, which means obviously it's on at all times. So William, can you run us through what's a good privacy practice? Should people be using these services? Should always listening mode be on your phone? And what does this really mean for our privacy going ahead?
I mean, just one point of clarification: when we think like the phone is listening, that you know the big tech have done a really good job to make you think that it's just this computer and that it's not, it's, you can't touch it, it's in some cloud, you can't do it. I mean, there's reporting from Bloomberg that it's clear that it's actually people listening on the other side. There's a story recently about how, I think, for English speakers, there's people in Poland sitting in kind of, like outsourced jobs, just listening. And we're hearing all sorts of stuff, from like family disputes to children crying, lots of different things that really are things that take place within the privacy of our homes. The challenge for consumers is that there's a very small number of these big tech platforms available in the world, and that they encourage us all the time to keep sharing more data. And they make it so that their products don't work as well unless they have all access to all your data all the time. So it's, there's no black and white thing that you can do. I mean, and I'm not a privacy expert. There are things you can do with your settings. There's, just to kind of go down through them, like, texting is a big thing. And WhatsApp is owned by Facebook and Instagram. They're collecting all your data. There's an alternative option called Signal. It's an encrypted messaging app. They're not collecting your data. That's one option. Within the world of kind of TikTok and Instagram and wanting short form video, there's a new app called Upscrolled that a lot of people I know I hear downloading, because TikTok has now been purchased by some American billionaires who are using it to basically editorialize. I think what people need to know is that since we started using things like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, we were kind of sold the idea that you're going to just be following your friends. And that you almost get to be your own editor. The reality is the people that own these companies, YouTube, Twitter, Elon Musk, they're the editors. So, like, if we look at, like, we're talking on DawnNews has an editor and a publisher, and the people that read DawnNews are deciding to, take that what the publisher presents them as the news of the day in Pakistan and elsewhere around the world. That's editorial, that's a publisher. But what's happening with these global platforms is they're able to use algorithms to basically put in front of people, what the politics of the people are that own it. So this new app called Upscrolled, it's owned by a Jordanian gentleman who's based in Australia, and he found himself shadow banned when he was posting content about what was happening in Gaza. So he decided to take it upon himself, and he's created this app that's really gone viral recently. That's Upscroll. There's within email, a lot of people use Gmail. There's alternatives there's one called Proton Mail that's not collecting all your information. Within a browser, so a lot of people use Chrome. Other people, you can use a browser called Brave. I'm not a privacy expert. Sam, I'm sure you know other alternatives as well, or even Mozilla is a little bit better, I think. But yeah, I wouldn't take me as the gospel on this, but just kind of, I just think that there are alternatives. It's definitely harder because all our stuff is kind of bundled together. But like when we hear stories like this, it definitely makes people like me kind of, be more cautious and more careful. Things like looking into your settings, like, wait, am I sharing all that information? Like whether it's your LinkedIn page or your Instagram, like, they make it really hard. They really hide this stuff. But it is worth taking that time, because if you're just making that available for the world, you've no idea whose hands it's getting into.
That's very helpful. And maybe we can jump back into, this particular case. So we find out that Google is actually listening to conversations, but maybe for the benefit of the audience, why are they listening to these conversations, and what are they doing with this data that they're collecting of us, speaking, uploading, posting, emailing, etc.?
The direct benefit for Google, and I just for context for the readers, I worked at Google for 10 years on the public policy team, and I worked on a lot of privacy related things. And there's two ways of looking at it. On one hand, it's making the your service, you as a consumer receiving from Google better. So if you take the example of in the past you've told Google that you're a vegetarian, and now you're looking for restaurants near me. in theory, Google then remembers that and knows that they'll just show you a vegetarian restaurant. Whether that works or not, I don't know. So Google would argue that there's benefits to making more information available and like having your search history on all the time. But from the kind of negative side of it, what they're ultimately doing is the more information they have about you, the more profitable it is for them basically to make that information available to advertisers. So they're able to tell Nike or Adidas, oh, this person, Osama, is looking for a size 10 pair of shoes, because they know from the search results and they can put that up in the top result. But I do know that that they, all of these services, whether it's Google Maps or, search results or, across the gamut, Google has a lot of products. They're constantly needing very timely information, right? So if you think of there's been an earthquake, you need to know in that instance what's happened. If Google have, all the books that they scanned 20 years ago, that's not really relevant to what people are searching right now. So in that specific moment, if they're not finding that real-time information on Google, people are going to start using other products. So it's a constant fight amongst the handful of tech global platforms to constantly be getting all your information all the time. Because if everybody in Islamabad is posting about traffic in a certain area, that feeds into the thing, and then people can then say, oh, trending on X or on Google search results, it can kind of make that little red dot, and that can be helpful, right? Like the red line under the traffic thing can tell you, oh, there's traffic there. So there is kind of helpful benefits to this on occasions, but again, there's this kind of constant kind of cost benefit to sharing all this information, in that you are basically handing it over, and you almost kind of are basically, you're losing control over your information, and you really don't know what they're doing with it. Like the other, just to put out there, and Google used to be really good on this, but it's changed over the years. But once your information is available to a global platform owner like this, they're typically working with, if they get requests from law enforcement, or if they get requests from, for example, in the US from ICE, they're typically going to be working with law enforcement to hand over that information. And there have been stories of where the law enforcement hasn't always come with a warrant. On occasion, if there is illegal activity, that that's a good thing to do. But we've heard instances in the US of ICE, for example, requesting Gmail information, and the people whose accounts that they were searching for, it wasn't clear what the thing was that they had done wrong.
I think that's a very important point, and this brings us to the issue of consent, because when we're downloading these applications, a lot of times we're not reading what the fine print is, and we're just saying, accept, yes, I consent. Yes, I consent to give you all my data. But is it really consensual? And especially in this case, as we found out that, it is blatantly against the consent or without the consent of the users that this data was being recorded. So where does consent factor in for big tech corporations when it comes to user data? And it's very helpful for you to bring up surveillance. Like, how are governments then using this data? You gave us the example of ICE, but if we think of, other governments around the world who are probably also requesting data and getting this from citizens, how does it risk the everyday life of normal citizens around the world?
I mean, to address your first point, consent is huge, and I think what on the big tech platform, what they're hoping they do is you just download the app, and on day one you click this big long list of legalese and don't look at it, which people just do because they want to use the app. In an ideal world, there would be more. These designers of these apps are able to build them in a way where they are checking each time. Are you sure you want to share all your photos with this app that you've just downloaded, your photos for the last 10 years? So there are ways that they can design apps in a way that isn't just hoovering up your data all the time, almost unbeknownst to you. Whether it's your photos or the text messages, or you can kind of make it so that it's not keeping your chat results for as long. And there, I think the way it's currently happening is the apps are constantly trying to kind of like not seek consent for you on each occasion, because they know that what they call is it's friction. They know that'll create friction, and it's going to cause them to not have as much data. and that the whole game that they're playing is all of the information everywhere all at once. And then to surveillance, I can't speak to Pakistan, but I can speak to kind of US and kind of and what they're often able to do is there's things like data brokers that are picking up everyone's data, where your electricity bills or your address, your car payment information, and then they're able to kind of bundle that up and kind of make it available to law enforcement agencies. There's a really some recent reporting in the US about how these immigration customs enforcement ICE have basically built almost like a Google Maps for searching someone's information and where they are right now. And they almost have, like, if you imagine on Google Maps, we search somebody's address, they've almost built basically the same thing, but for searching for people. And this is all very much a kind of recent development where, they've tied together a number of new databases, whether it's your tax information, your health information. And again, this is on the US perspective, but that's really scary because, they'll argue that they're just doing this for people who've broken the law, but we've seen that these tools, once they're built, are often used, by nefarious actors, whether it's a jealous partner or it's a law enforcement agent who just doesn't like somebody because they have a different type of color of skin, or they get basically abused. And when you make all this information, you make it really easy to kind of find everything about somebody. They're able to go from like taking a picture of somebody with facial recognition right through to who they are, whether they paid tax 8 years ago. And it's, I think, the big takeaway is that we've been talking about this for a long time, but it's really only they're really only starting to bring it all together now. And they're, and I think unless we kind of start finding ways to push back against it, it can only get worse from here. And whether you think you might be okay because you're 65 and, it's gone for me. Like, the reality is, like, we have kids, we have younger people that, that they're growing up in a world that, if you make a mistake, is that something that's going to hound you for the rest of your life? If you're going to, young people are out playing with their friends and you kind of want them to be able to live in a world that's not constantly under the watch. You want to be, so like there are like legitimate concerns, I think, for the development of humanity, honestly. And we don't want like a very small number of people, because we think of big tech as like, 4 big brands, but it's basically people, and their motives are to suck the profit, as much profit from this as possible. We don't want their motivations to be what's guiding the future of, the culture of privacy, the culture of human relationships. There's so many things in that I don't think it's a good move for humanity if we let the current direction continue on this path.
And I believe, I'm glad you brought up facial recognition. And of course it uses artificial intelligence to group people together, to detect what their movement is, what they're doing, where they are. And at the same time, you spoke about the bias, right? And because there's so much algorithmic bias, but also bias in the humans who are creating these systems, which these systems are essentially emulating or mirroring. So that bias gets oftentimes, multiplied through the technology that is being used. I think it's also important to talk about regulation, right? And we've seen how big tech has kept growing. There have been efforts to rein it in through the Federal Trade Commission, and other anti-competition moves in the European Union, for example, with the latest Digital Services Act and other laws. But in the current climate, how far can we get in holding tech companies accountable, in regulating them, and looking at gaps in enforcement? Where are we right now? Has the progress that was made in the past few years, has it gone back, or are we going to a better direction?
I mean, every country is different in terms of the different directions, but obviously in the US we've seen a clear shift towards less regulation, less enforcement, less accountability for bad actors, whether that's in tech or just across kind of corporate America. But there remains hope. There's an effort currently, within the tech industry in the US to push their CEOs to break from ICE and to break from Trump. It's a letter iceout.tech. Um, and all of these kind of all of the I think from the big tech side, so much of what we're experiencing they're presenting as inevitable. At every case or at every juncture, they're constantly kind of telling you that like there can literally be no regulation. We need to kind of not put guardrails on this thing, especially now we have AI and we need to make
Hmm.
sure we can innovate. It's the same tired talking points we've been hearing for literally 20 years now. And during those 20 years, these companies have gone from small startups to the most powerful entities in the world. Some of these companies, Google, for example, was closing on a valuation, a market cap of $4 trillion. So like there's, these are more powerful than any one nation state. They're able to come to places like kind of small countries or even big countries and kind of say like, well, if you're going to regulate us, we're moving out, or that like they're able to kind of like
Hmm.
really use bullying tactics. And it's on us to all know a few things. One, it's not inevitable. There are ways that we can actually regulate. Whether it's citizens being informed, whether it's members of parliament standing up for the people instead of just listening to the lobbyists. Um, Also on the media to really make clear to people what's actually going on and not just taking the kind of corporate talking points. So there's always ways to push back against anything. Osama, like there's no one straight line to anything. And it's really important for people to at minimum inform themselves of what's happening, and then within all of our own worlds and kind of environments to figure out like what makes sense for you and your family, for you and your community. Because yeah, it often gets presented as just like this is just a fake complete, this is just what's happening, but it just doesn't need to be that way. And I'd encourage everybody to read about what some of these companies are doing, and at minimum to go and look at the settings in your apps, maybe start using different apps, and to try find alternatives, and call your member of parliament, talk to them about what they're doing to ensure people, whether it's in Pakistan or elsewhere, their privacy. There's so many things people can do.
And when we talk about Google in specific, in February of last year, they quietly removed the exception in their AI principles of using user data for surveillance and military purposes. So what we're seeing now is that all of this data is now kosher for providing to law enforcement, like you mentioned earlier, but also the exclusion of the systems from providing this data for surveillance to governments, for military uses, for defense purposes is also gone. So maybe you can speak a bit to how tech companies have been involved with militaries around the world, and especially in the context of the genocide by Israel and Gaza. We've seen the role of big tech companies. So what has that looked like, and has that had an impact on how these companies operate in the rest of the world, for example, in the United States today?
It's interesting you asked that. Just yesterday, actually, there's a story in the Washington Post. A whistleblower has alleged from inside Google that they helped an Israeli military contractor with AI, to basically use the Google AI and drone surveillance video. And that's just kind of emerging now, even though the genocide in Gaza was ongoing for, what is it, over 2 or 3 years now. Um, I quit Google in early 2018. I got involved in a campaign called Cancel Maven. And Maven was a contract that Google had signed with the DoD to put AI into drones. And I helped organize a petition that over 4,000 of my colleagues signed to say basically cancel the contract. At the time, it was like an idea. And if you think about it, like drones are the things that are up in the sky. So the thing that the military people in the DoD were presenting, and the IDF were presenting, like imagine if William is a bad guy. We've heard that William is a bad guy, and we're able to track him from the eyes in the sky as he walks the streets of Islamabad. And we know exactly where he is. We know where he sleeps at night. We know when he goes out for his chai. We know, where he goes for his lunch, and we can constantly keep an eye on him. And then one fine day, if we get intelligence, wherever the intelligence comes from, who knows, that William has done a bad thing, one press of one button, he's gone. So this was the kind of dream, the vision that had been presented in 2017, by the DoD to Google, and Google said, "Cool, we can help you build that for $250 million." And at the time, like if you look at your iPhone or your Android, if you search cats or dogs, if I search dog on my phone, it gets me all my pictures of my my former
Yeah.
dog, and that's what image recognition is, right? It's basically using kind of algorithms to see patterns in an image to figure out what's what. And that technology is actually no different than what the drone in the sky is doing to follow that particular person, whether it's a person, it's a
Mm.
car. Um, and, the more that they have more images of me walking around Islamabad, this is all examples, the better they're able to train their things. So they have thousands of the images of cats and dogs, and that's where this all started. Going back like 20 years, they just trained millions and tens of millions of images of cat, cat, dog, and now it's getting better and better. And they're able to make those algorithms continue to make them better and better by just having more information. And it's really is like this really scary future that they've developed, because we don't have full details. There's a publication actually out of Israel called IDF magazine. They've published a lot of stories about how these kind of massive kill lists were generated. And what was really interesting in that reporting was everyone in Google at the time talked about this kill chain. As long as it was kind of like, well, as long as we weren't pressing the button like that, then maybe we don't, the company isn't guilty of it. But it was clear from this reporting that the mandate came from the top. It was like, kill them all. So it didn't really matter if somebody, in the AI kind of, working the drones had an opinion whether they don't know if that person was guilty or not. Like it was a mass slaughter from the sky. A lot is built on terrible intelligence. So oftentimes the AI almost becomes the excuse to, oh well, the computer has decided that that person's a bad guy, and ultimately there's humans behind a lot of these things. And yeah, it's just a very scary future, that not future but present, that they built, and they've deployed it in Gaza. Everybody knows the horrific effects of what they've done. Unforgivable. And the question is like, where are they going to deploy it next? Because they've built this technology now, and it's a really scary thought to think that they could, even in the US right now with the protests, how they're starting to like identify protesters and ultimately detain some of them. They're really going after anybody, and a lot of this is technology that's developed in Gaza by big tech companies, including Google, Amazon, Palantir, and others.
William, you've spoken to what users can do to keep themselves, safer. We're talking about a settlement, a $68 million settlement by Google, for a claim that it recorded private conversations. What does the future of regulation look like, and where do we go next from here? In terms of what are the campaigns that are happening that you may be involved in, but also like in the next few years, how do we better hold these companies accountable to human rights standards across the world?
I'd even go, it's more specific than human rights standards. Like if you look at other industries, whether it's the airline industry or the car industry, like they were all forced to have seatbelts to ensure people, in driving kept to, the speed limits and stuff. And right now in tech, there's basically nothing. There's a real need for regulators, whether they're in Pakistan or in America or anywhere else, to stop listening to the corporate talking points. It's not innovation when children are on ChatGPT, basically Googling how to commit suicide and then getting advice how to do it. It's not good when our kids are on YouTube or Roblox and talking to creepy old men. Like, these are real problems, and the tech companies are aware that they're happening on their platforms, and they're turning a blind eye because they get to profit more from it. And we need our regulators to step up. I can guarantee they'll get more votes if they do that. They need to stop listening to their corporate donors and the lobbyists, and they need to listen to people, because like there's real concerns, whether it's older people who are getting kind of frauded because they're not knowing what they're clicking on, or it's younger people seeing stuff online or speaking to people that they shouldn't be speaking to. There's just so many dangers out there. And there needs to be strict and not just a regulation that's been written, but like very clear enforcement. Like if you break this, we're going to sue you. And $68 million is a sneeze for Google. Like if you make $100 a month, it's like a cent for that 100. They're making tens and tens of billions. 68 billion million is literally less than peanuts. So we need to see real enforcement, real accountability, um, um, and hit these people where they hurt, which is in their pockets.
And at the same time, I think there's also this, understanding between companies and governments in a lot of places where companies say, or governments say to companies, if you give us all of this information, perhaps we won't go that hard on you. So I think as citizens, we have this double responsibility of not holding the companies accountable, but also ensuring that the states are not getting our data from the companies at the same time. But thank you so much for this conversation. This was very, very helpful and illuminating. And I'm sure the audience would benefit from this discussion in terms of, how we can better protect our privacy while using our devices, which we seem to be doing almost 24/7 now. But also the bigger picture of how these companies can be held accountable. So thank you very much for joining us. And this is Usama Khilji signing out from DigiPod, and see you next Wednesday.